The Last Tick, a captivating story written by Anna Sai, published in 2024. A journey where time, mystery, and fate intertwine. Chapter 1. The Broken Clock. The winter wind howled against the leaded glass windows of Timeless Curiosities, rattling the panes as if demanding entry. Inside, Elias Whitlock worked by the warm glow of a desk lamp, his head bowed over a delicate pocket watch. His hands moved with precision, the tiny tools glinting as he adjusted the intricate gears. The rhythmic ticking of clocks surrounded him, a symphony of time, some steady, others slightly offbeat, all blending into a background hum that was both comforting and constant. The bell above the shop's door jangled sharply, cutting through the quiet. Elias straightened, his fingers still holding the watch, and glanced toward the front of the shop. A woman stood just inside the doorway, her dark coat dusted with snow. Her hair, pulled back into a loose bun, was damp from the weather, and her gray eyes scanned the room with a sharpness that made Elias uneasy. "Can I help you?" he asked, setting the watch aside and rising to his feet. The woman stepped forward, her boots clicking softly on the worn wooden floor. She carried a small, worn leather satchel, which she placed on the counter with care. "I need this fixed," she said, her voice low and steady. Elias opened the satchel and pulled out an antique clock. It was a mantelpiece style, smaller than most but heavier than it looked. The brass casing was tarnished, its face cracked, but what caught his attention were the strange symbols engraved around its edge, marks he didn't recognize. "This is unusual," he said, running his fingers along the edge. "Can you fix it?" the woman asked, her tone clipped. Elias hesitated. "Possibly, but it's not just damaged. It's been tampered with." "Can you fix it?" she interrupted, her voice sharper now. He frowned. "Yes, but it'll take time, a week at least." "No," she said quickly. 2 days. I need it done by then." Elias raised an eyebrow. "This kind of work doesn't come with a rush option." The woman leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "This clock is important. If anyone else asks about it, you didn't see me, and you don't know anything." Her intensity took him off guard. He met her gaze, searching for some explanation, but her expression betrayed nothing. "That's a lot to ask," he said. She opened her coat just enough to show a folded envelope tucked into the inner pocket. "I'll make it worth your time." Elias sighed. "Fine, 2 days. But if it's broken beyond repair, there's nothing I can do." The woman nodded, then glanced toward the window as if she expected someone to be watching. "I'll be back," she said, pulling her coat tighter as she turned toward the door. "Wait," Elias called after her. "What's your name?" She paused, one hand on the doorknob. "You don't need to know." The bell jingled again as she slipped out into the storm. Elias stood there for a moment, staring at the empty doorway before turning back to the clock. In the back room, Elias set the clock on his workbench under the lamp. The engravings around its edge glinted faintly in the light, and as he turned it over, he noticed something even stranger. The back panel was sealed, but not with screws or clasps. It was as if the casing itself had been designed to keep its contents hidden. He frowned. This wasn't just a broken antique, it was something else entirely. Picking up a small chisel, Elias began working on the panel. The metal resisted at first, but with a little effort it gave way, revealing the clock's inner mechanism. His breath caught. The gears and springs were more intricate than any he'd ever seen, but what drew his attention was a small metal disc tucked among them, engraved with writing so faint he almost missed it. Carefully, he lifted the disc out and held it up to the light. The words etched into the surface weren't names or symbols he recognized. They were dates, precise dates, paired with what looked like city names. London, December 15th, 2023. Paris, January 9th, 2024. Berlin, March 21st, 2024. Elias's frown deepened. He turned the disc over, but there was no maker's mark, no explanation for what it was or why it was hidden inside the clock. He set it aside and leaned back in his chair, staring at the dismantled mechanism. Something about the whole situation felt wrong. The woman's urgency, her cryptic warnings, and now this mysterious disc. The ticking of the other clocks in the room seemed louder now, their rhythms overlapping in an unsteady beat. Elias shook his head, trying to brush off the unease. "It's just a clock," he muttered, reaching for his tools again. But as he picked up the disc to examine it once more, a sudden chill ran down his spine. He turned sharply, certain he'd heard something. A faint creak of a floorboard behind him. The room was empty. Elias exhaled slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. The wind howled louder outside, rattling the windows again, and he forced himself to focus. He would finish the repair, deliver the clock, and be done with it. Whatever it wasn't his problem. The back room of timeless curiosities was silent, except for the faint rhythmic ticking of the clocks lining the shelves. Elias sat hunched over the dismantled brass clock, its exposed mechanism glinting under the desk lamp. Beside it lay the disc he'd found earlier, the engraved dates and locations shimmering faintly in the warm light. Elias turned the disc over in his hands for the third time, his brow furrowed in concentration. The engravings were precise, almost unnaturally so, as if they'd been etched with a tool far more advanced than anything he had in his shop. The first line on the disc was impossible to ignore. December 15th, 2023, London. That date was today. The name that followed was equally unsettling, Victor Crane. Elias leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He wasn't one to follow the news religiously, but the name was vaguely familiar. Reaching for his phone, he typed Victor Crane London into the search bar. The first headline hit him like a blow. Industrial tycoon Victor Crane found dead in London hotel room. Elias's stomach churned as he scanned the article. The death, reported just hours ago, was being treated as suspicious. The police had yet to release details, but anonymous sources hinted at foul play. He set the phone down, his hands shaking. The date, the location, the name, all of it matched the engravings on the disc. This wasn't some decorative piece, it was a record. But of what? Elias stared at the dismantled clock, his unease deepening. The woman who'd brought it to him had been desperate, almost panicked, and now he understood why. This clock wasn't just unusual, it was dangerous. Determined to understand more, Elias returned his attention to the clock itself. As he carefully adjusted the gears, his chisel slipped against one of the inner panels, and something clicked. A hidden compartment popped open. Inside was a second disc, smaller than the first, with similar engravings. But this time, they weren't just dates and locations. They were names. Elias held the disc closer, his pulse quickening. The first line read, Victor Crane, December 15th, 2023, London. The next was just as precise. Maggie Fairchild, January 9th, 2024, Paris. He swallowed hard, his eyes scanning further down the list. There were at least 10 names, each paired with a date and city. Some of the names he didn't recognize, but the last one made his blood run cold. Elias Whitlock, December 18th, 2023, Whitlock Hollow. Elias stared at the words, willing them to be a trick of the light. But there it was, etched with the same precision as the others. His own name, his own death, and the date, 3 days from now. The room seemed to close in around him, the steady ticking of the clocks growing louder, more insistent. For a moment, Elias thought he might be sick. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor, and paced the room, the disc clutched tightly in his hand. What was this? Some kind of elaborate hoax? But the death of Victor Crane wasn't a coincidence. Someone or something was using this clock to track these events, or worse, to plan them. A memory surfaced, unbidden, his mother's voice years ago, warning him about his father's curious friends and the secrets they kept. They had a way of making things happen, she'd said, though she never explained what she meant. Elias shook his head, forcing the thought away. This was no time for half-remembered warnings. He needed answers. He picked up his phone again, this time searching for Maggie Fairchild. It didn't take long to find her. She was an investigative journalist based in Paris, known for her exposés on organized crime. Another name on the list, another clear target. Elias set the phone down, his heart hammering in his chest. If the clock was some kind of tool for coordinating these killings, then whoever had brought it to him was either running from the people who used it or working for them. His thoughts were interrupted by a faint creak from the shop floor. Elias froze, straining to listen. The sound came again, the soft groan of a floorboard under weight. Someone was in the shop. Slowly, he slid the discs into his pocket and reached for the heavy brass candlestick he kept on a shelf by the workbench. His grip tightened around it as he edged toward the door, his breathing shallow. The shop was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the street lamp outside. Shadows stretched across the shelves, creating long, jagged shapes that danced with every flicker of light. "Who's there?" Elias called, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. No answer. He took another step forward, his pulse thundering in his ears. The faint ticking of the clocks filled the silence, their rhythm suddenly out of sync, creating a discordant hum that set his teeth on edge. Then he saw it, a figure near the front counter, shrouded in shadow. "Stop!" Elias shouted, raising the candlestick. The figure didn't move. For a moment, Elias thought it might be a trick of the light, but then the shadow shifted, melting back into the darkness. Elias lunged forward, flipping the light switch by the door. The room flooded with brightness, but it was empty. His breath came in shallow gasps as he scanned the shop. The door was still locked, the windows unbroken. Whoever had been here was gone. And yet, when he turned back to the counter, something new caught his eye. A single sheet of paper, folded neatly, had been placed on the surface. With trembling hands, Elias unfolded it. 4 words were scrawled in sharp, uneven handwriting. "Time is running out."